Great. Well, welcome everyone to our very first episode of our new series. It'll be 6 parts where we talk about data, tech stacks, QuickBooks, payroll, kind of everything encompassing the day-to-day running of the accounting side of the business, which I know sounds like a lot of fun, definitely a lot of fun for us, but hopefully we can make it entertaining and also really interesting because your data can tell you a lot more than you think it can. So episode 1, we're going to talk about data. Our panelists are Brenda Payton, and she'll be hosting the 6 episode series with me. And she is our accounting and payroll team leader with JCCS. If you all attended our PPP webinars, then you will know both me, Erin Vukolich, I work in our client advisory service line, and Tony, who also hosted our PPP webinars. He's our director of audit and accounting and is shareholder with the firm. And then we have Drew, who is joining us out of the Missoula office. He's our shareholder, or one of our shareholders, and he does a lot of audit work and business valuations. Am I missing anything there, Drew? We're good? Wonderful. We are recording this. It'll be posted on our website, and I believe we'll be sharing the slides as well after, probably a couple of days after today's recording. We do have our disclaimer just saying, hey, we are as factual as we can be. If you have specific questions about your business or any specifics, try to talk to your tax advisor at JCCS or your accounting and payroll professional, which we like to call our app team. Definitely feel free to reach out to them or reach out to any of us after the webinar. So, what is data? To me, when I think of data, I think of a bunch of ones and zeros from binary code. I grew up in a household of tech people. My dad's a software programmer, and my mom's a business analyst. So for me, immediately, I think ones and zeros, that makes sense. But that's not how a lot of other people think. Some people think of big data. Some people think of data scientists. Some people think it's just this thing that doesn't really have anything to do with them because they're in their business just day to day. So it's interesting and sometimes hard to think about what exactly is our data. And then when we think about that, it's taking to the next step of what is that data and what can it tell us? We have the input of it and the output. Well, right now in the accounting industry, super exciting, we're moving away from that input. We're using technology to help us process all of the data that's coming in. Data processors, not much of a term that's used anymore for people because it's all done by computers. So that lets us focus on the output. We can see what the data is actually telling us. We can corroborate it with financial, non-financial data. It gives us so much more information and a much clearer picture of what's happening. So not just for the accounting industry itself, but also for business owners, decision makers in the business. It's a really exciting time, spending less time on the gathering and inputting of the data and more time on what is it telling us and making really good decisions from the output of that data. The insight that we get now helps us transform businesses, and we're excited to help our clients streamline their processes so they're gathering the right kind of data and getting the right results. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that conversation. I'm going to pass it off to Brenda to get us started on our very first slide.
Thanks, Erin. So to start us off, let's just find out a little bit more about data and why it's so important. Tony, did you want to expand on that for us?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So really, at the core, data really is just all the bits of information that help business owners understand their customers and how their businesses perform. It's everything that helps us make decisions. That can be staffing decisions, it can be order quantities, it can be workflow processes, it can be what we can sell, what we shouldn't sell. So really at the core, if businesses ignore the data that they're getting from all those sources, really they're going to limit their ability to maximize their performance.
So it's really the backbone of any business decision, really.
Absolutely. Yep.
So how do we differentiate between the good and the bad?
Well, really so you can kind of talk about the attributes of, both ends of the spectrum of businesses with good data and bad data, and maybe even talk about businesses that ignore their data, and they're just so busy operating in a vacuum. And typically these are businesses that are going to be understaffed and excessively busy. They're just so busy serving their customers that they simply have no time to look at the data and everything that's available to them. Obviously, on that end of the spectrum, you're talking about impacts of potentially underserving their customer, even though that their focus is completely working on their business. Ultimately, they could be underserving that customer. They can be leaving significant profits on the table. You're looking at burning out key employees, just numerous other bad outcomes from ignoring data or using bad data. So then on the other end of the spectrum, just touch briefly on that, are going to be businesses that, it's analyze and crunch too much data. So, you hear the term paralysis by analysis or data overload. So really that good data, bad data is going to be that mix, kind of that happy balance in between those two.
Yeah, and really knowing what to identify as the information you need versus the information you don't need.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think all of us here have some pretty good stories about the good, the bad, and the ugly as far as data goes, and outcomes with clients that we've worked with over the years. But maybe if you could just touch on some of the good outcomes that you've seen and versus the bad.
Sure. So I think really I'm just going to boil down. Good data is going to be anything that helps you make a decision on a day-to-day basis. So, if you kind of leave that as your basic framework of what good outcomes and bad outcomes are going to be, it's going to be based on the quality of the data you have and the decisions you make off of it. So really some of the best examples that I have are, businesses that'll, maybe summarize good data on a dashboard. It's really refined. And maybe it's telling them their top selling products or their highest margin products. And that way let's say you're making a decision based off of product placement or shelf space allocation. That's going to be really good data. Probably the best way to maximize profits on, what you sell. In a restaurant business, maybe you're calculating data based on the number of turns you're making during a lunch rush, and you're making staffing decisions based off of that. So that couples that, good data and a decision made based on that data. I can also maybe just touch base on maybe a poor use of data.
Sure.
We have businesses that, summarize data or have employees code their hours based on departments. But when they analyze financial information, they're just looking at it company-wide. So they're calculating data that may be really good in some aspects, but they're not using it to make any decisions off of it at that department level. So using their employee time to crunch information that they're not utilizing. So that would be a great example of bad data.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So as we...
go
ahead.
I wanted to add on to Tony's example of doing the departmental. And I think we see this really frequently when we start working with a new client. They come in with a chart of accounts that is 8 to 9 pages long, and they're coding things to all these different accounts, thinking that that's the right way or the good way to do it, but it's not really telling them anything. That's so long that they can't get any comparative data or anything out of it. So your good data or bad data could just be on how you're categorizing things or what your chart of accounts is. It can be as simple as that.
That might be one of the best real world examples that we see every single day is, just the chart of accounts that people use.
Yeah, I think a lot of times businesses, they feel it's got to be in alphabetical order or the industry standard. And really, when it comes to the end results, it really should be what the management needs to look at. You know, if you want to group all of your employment or personnel costs, let's group them so it's right there for you to see and not, you know, fall back on that alphabetical listing. Any other thoughts before we move on to identifying data? Okay.
Wonderful. So now that we've talked about good data, bad data, we're going to look at actually identifying what your data is. We need to make sure that it's good, that you're measuring the right things. So Drew, when you think of the term data, what does that all encompass?
Really, when I think of data, I mean, data is literally the byproduct of everything that takes place in and around our business. We can think of it in terms of some of the traditional sources of data, and some of them are listed here. But traditionally, we know we get invoices and bills in our business, and we have, you know, employment records and things like that. That's some of the traditional forms of data. But I think it's really interesting and extremely useful when we kind of step outside of the box and think about those non-traditional sources of data that are taking place around our business. And it might be things like, you know, the popular ones like customer counts or like number of meals served. But it might also be something as simple as weather patterns. If you're a business that is really affected by weather, like if you're a ski resort type of company, of course, but also if you're a company that sells snowblowers, and identifying when weather patterns take place so you can make sure that you are stocked up to take advantage of sales when they're going to occur. So some of those non-traditional sources really are blind to us sometimes because they're, as I said, non-traditional. It's things that we're not capturing as part of our everyday process, just as a normal byproduct of our business, like sales data sometimes is when we capture it, when we record it in our accounting records. So those are some things that really I think about. And taking it a step beyond that too, the formats of data. Some data is in, you know, traditional formats like a paper trail type of document. Some is electronic, but a lot of data out there that might be important is things that are just observable. And that's where it comes down to identifying what could be important in your business, the things that really drive your business activity or how your customers think, and finding a way to capture that data, whether it's traditional, electronic, or just observable.
I think that observable term is really interesting and something that we don't think about very often. I remember attending a session about big data and how one company had used video cameras to record all the goings on in their business, and they were looking for one specific data point, but they got so much more that they learned because they were video recording like the whole retail space. So it's interesting to hear observable. And then how do you think that we get the observable data out of that? How do we corroborate that, or how do we even put that into a form that we can measure?
Yeah, you know, it's really funny. A lot of times observable data, when we talk about it in our business without capturing it, a lot of times it's anecdotal. So it's things like, gosh, I feel like our business does really good with these things, or I feel like, you know, when this happens with the weather pattern or with events that come to our town, we see this kind of effect on our sales, or this kind of product really moves. And what we need to do is take that anecdotal data, because every business owner, I feel like, feels this and knows it in their gut. But we need to take that anecdotal part and make it into, think about how we can harvest that data. Mm-hmm. So right now, and it was prefaced at the beginning of this, there's so much really interesting technology that's available, and technology that I feel like in the past was only available to big companies because it was more expensive. But now you do have the ability as a smaller business to invest in some technology, and it might be something as simple as a customer counter, something that tracks the number of people that come into your door. It also might be something a little bit more complex, like if you're a retail company, and this is something Tony mentioned too, where you want to know where people are spending time in your store. So you can do better product placement, especially things that are really high movers or high margin items for your business. But when you can identify what's really important for you, then you can step back and look at the technology that's available and decide to invest in something that is really going to take that observable data and put it into something that you can use, you can analyze, you can compare, you can even plot it against other data like customer counts and time of year or weather or, you know, whatever it may be.
That's great. And actually, that's a great lead up to our next slide. Unless Tony, Brenda, did you have anything else to add to this one?
No.
Great. Well, like I said, leads right into our next slide about managing that data and how you're pulling it all together. Brenda, go ahead.
All right. So I'm sure everybody knows that as you start looking at all of the data in a business, it can just quickly become very overwhelming. Trying to look at, you know, exactly what data should we manage. But I think the more important question is who should be managing the data, and making sure that we have that right person in the right seat. So I wanted to ask Tony if he could speak to that.
Sure. It's really, it's one of the concepts that we echo over and over in our firm, and we try and, you know, emphasize that with our clients as well. I'll go back to probably what I feel is probably one of the best business strategy books that's ever been written, Good to Great by Jim Collins. If you haven't read it, you should be taking a note right now. Go read Good to Great. So he has a concept in there, first who, then what. And really that's just another way of saying getting the right people on the bus and then getting them in the right seats. So what we typically see with businesses, let's say it's a sales type business, they've got a star salesman, they're really good at it, they're leading the company and generating revenue. That in turn develops trust with the ownership. So ownership naturally wants to give them more responsibilities. So maybe they're going to have them start analyzing data or giving them some management tasks, something that really is just not suited to their strengths. So now we've got the right person, but now the ownership has put them on the wrong seat in the bus. And that really limits the performance of that company. So I think it's important to look at, okay, what's the strength? You know, do I have this capability in my business, in my company, to analyze the data? Do I have the capabilities to step back and identify those observable items that, you know, maybe Drew was talking about? Or do I need to look outside my company, bring in a consultant, an advisor, or maybe I need to hire the right person to do that analyst work? So that's really that who, then what, you know, right people on the bus in the right seats.
Yeah, and I think all of us have had that business owner apologize to us that, oh, I should be better at this. I should know what I'm doing. But it really goes back to, you know, you're the person leading your business. You're really good at maybe X, Y, Z. This is what we're here for, is to help you on the finances, help you analyze the data, or partner with you in that seat. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the ways that we should be looking at managing data? I know we've seen it come in all different forms. We don't see the shoebox as much anymore, so that's good. But what are some of the pitfalls that you see there?
You know, it comes down to the businesses that are most successful in their analysis of their data or reporting. It all comes down to consistent processes and procedures. Okay, those are businesses that have discipline in all aspects of that cycle. So they're capturing it, they're recording it, summarizing it, and reporting, and then analyzing the reporting on that. So there's a whole circle of life for data, and those businesses that have the most success are consistent and disciplined in that process. And then likewise, if you just want to take the other side, obviously, if you've got a lack of discipline in any one of those areas, you're going to have a breakdown in either your ability to analyze the data or report the data. A lot of times it's even recording and summarizing. You talk about the shoebox a little bit, and you get, you know, clients that come to the end of the year and, well, I got to catch up, you know, 9-10 months of my accounting before we can do a tax return. So obviously they've got something going on in their business from they're too busy working on the business, or it's a skill that's just not suitable to them. And those folks are probably leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, it's really a missed opportunity. If you're looking at it monthly on a regular basis, you're able to see that observable trends as well.
Yeah.
What you might be missing out there. So I know it's easier to talk about sometimes the unsuccessful stories, but I know that we have seen a lot of success in the last couple of years with some of our clients in transitioning to more of this cloud computing and storage of data. I know you've got some success stories that you could share with us.
Yeah, certainly. And I think the ones that we see the most success with are, they're fully electronic in that data capture process. So that upfront capture of data is all electronic, it's cloud-based, and really what it does is it's that basic element that sets them up for success. They're able to now leverage technology in the rest of the aspects of that cycle. They're able to use machine learning to perform a lot of those analysis tasks, routine data management, all the way through the reporting piece, and summarizing it into a nice, concise dashboard that gives me maybe those 3 to 8 bits of information that really help me make decisions on a day-to-day basis. So really that fully electronic capture is that core.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see how far we've come. We used to be the accounting firm where you drop all your books off. We tell you within 10 business days, we'll have your financials back to you. And now we're able to, take a phone call from a client, hop into their QuickBooks, take a look and see where they're at and give them advice right then. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that real-time access to information is so important today. So
yeah.
I think too, there is an opportunity kind of hearkening or relating back to Drew's non-traditional data. If you have all of the stuff that you can do electronically, your receipts, your invoices, everything is all in the cloud, that gives you then the opportunity to start looking for those non-traditional sources of data that really can help you make your decisions. So if you streamlined everything from the hard, the paper, if you've done all of that into the cloud, you can really then have this freed up time to look at other things that may give you some really important and really strong insights.
Definitely. Any other thoughts from anyone on managing the data before we go into workflow? All right, Erin.
Well, I have to admit, the workflow slide is my absolute favorite. It has a great picture. I did not draw that. I love talking about workflow and how data moves through businesses. Just drawing out or mapping out how that information flows is something that I really enjoy, and I love seeing how things move, how things are working. Drew, can you give us a couple examples of strong workflow processes?
Yeah, I can give us a start here. I think some of the strongest workflow processes that we see maybe start with the basics, because a lot of people are really comfortable with their basics. And so that might be the things that really keep your business going on the day-to-day. So if you're a retail business, it might be, that flow of when inventory comes in, when it's placed on your floor, when that's sold, and the reorder process. So it seems like when companies have a really good idea of when they're following that data, so they know when a retail item is getting to a certain point, like maybe 10 items and you sell 20 per day, it's like, oh gosh, we're behind in ordering this. So a successful data flow model should be something where you are looking at your data as it's coming through that cycle and as it repeats in a timely enough fashion that we can make decisions and be able to change, I guess the activity that's a result of that cycle. Without that, or if you're not looking at it timely, that's where we get to the point where our shelves are empty. We don't have the product that people need. Maybe we don't have the product that people need at the right time. So that's where really things can break down quickly.
I think that bottleneck is, I know that's something that we've dealt with internally is, our workflow process was decent, but we still experience bottlenecks. So understanding why those bottlenecks are happening or how the work is flowing at least lets us know at which point we've found the issue, and then we can look at fixing it or putting a better process in place. Some of the other things that can happen from a workflow breakdown is late information. So you're getting the information too late to make a really good, timely decision. You have loss of performance. One interesting thing that I think Tony may have listed on our notes is the work silos. Tony, could you talk a little bit to that?
Sure. So that's, without a workflow, you're going to end up with these work silos. So knowing how something flows through your processes, you're going to end up getting people who are working basically in a vacuum. So no one knows how much work they have. No one knows where projects are. It just comes in and gets done, which may be fine, but it certainly doesn't optimize a business's performance. So that's one of the risks of either having no workflow process or perhaps a too simple of a workflow process, not enough steps, not enough accountability. And also kind of to speak to Drew's comment about looking at your basics, what are you comfortable with your basics? You can have a workflow that's too complex, right? Too many steps, too many handoffs, and it just becomes time consuming. And now you're too busy moving things through your workflow and you're not really serving your customer in an optimal method.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced that too complex of a workflow. I think we've seen it internally a few years ago. We had built a process up that we thought was great, but it ended up taking so much time to go through the process that for very, very little payoff that it just wasn't worth it. We were spending so much time working through each step because we thought we needed them. And I think that indicates or shows that it's always good to review your processes. I think we try to do it on an annual basis, looking at the efficiency of our process as well as the output. Are our processes good enough for our output? Is the output good enough? Or do we need to put in more processes or take some away? So that evaluation of the workflow and the passage of information through the business is something that I think can be hard for businesses to do because it's not necessarily a fun thing, even though I think it's super fun. It's not something they think about doing, somewhat frequently on an annual basis or maybe a biannual basis. So definitely something that I think is a great idea is to review those processes. And that gives you the opportunity to incorporate any new technology that's coming out, which we will definitely be discussing in our next episode, which is all about the tech stack and the ecosystem. So we'll talk about identifying tech and how you fit that into your current workflow. Did anyone else have anything to share on our information workflow page?
Well, I think when you're talking about your workflow and the processes, I think it's also important to decide how much risk you're willing to take on.
Yeah.
With newer staff, you might have to have more steps in place naturally because they just are new to the process. But with more seasoned staff, you may be willing to take on some risk and cut out some of those steps along the way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another important avenue to look at.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're really talking about this lean process. I mean, a lot of people probably have read and a lot on lean processes, and that's that balance between quality control and efficiency. And it is an art form, and you got to be constantly questioning, where you're at on that spectrum based on, either who you have as employees, who you have as customers, all those things.
Well, Brenda, I'm going to hand it off to you on, I think, one of the most frequent questions we get at the firm.
Yes, it is file retention. And we've seen the extremes. We've seen the clients that don't want to keep anything beyond the 3 years, and I mean anything. And then we see the clients that they want to keep everything for the life of the business and sometimes beyond. So this is definitely one of the areas we see a lot of questions. We've got some good feedback on it for you today. So I wanted to just turn it over to Drew to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when it comes to retention of data, we do got to think about the life cycle of our data, and every data has a life cycle. Even though, we all have, like, I know my grandparents, I think they have every tax return they've ever filed, which is unbelievable. Right. So really, we've been talking about the creation, the usage of data. Now it kind of gets down into the storage and the archival of the data that we do capture in our business cycle. And so I do want to break that into a couple different things, or maybe I'd like to fold it all together, really. Because when we talk about data, some of the important and useful data that we have are the traditional sources that we have. And some of those things we actually have a legal requirement to retain them for a certain number of periods, or a certain number of years. So where I'd like to start with this is to really introduce, or if you're already familiar with it, bring it up again, a really good data retention policy, or document retention policy, as they've been termed in the past. But this policy is something that communicates to you and your employees, and also to make sure that employees that take over after you have turnover, having this policy in place makes sure that it's communicated consistently as your business evolves into the future. But this document really should outline how long you should keep different types of data. And I would really start with some of those traditional sources and some of those things that statutorily we're required to retain, like employment records, tax returns and stuff like we had mentioned. So some of that stuff is really important to make sure that you're retaining it for the required period of time. So now that we get that out of the way, now we can think about some of these more non-traditional sources of data that we have. And that becomes a little bit more tricky because there's not some regulatory agency saying you need to keep your customer counts for 10 years. So that's when we got to think about it in terms of ourselves and think about at which point does this data become irrelevant for us? Or when is it replaced by data that's more accurate or more usable? And so this might just be a number of business cycles for your business. Maybe it's 10 business cycles that you retain your information, and then you can purge because you have really good information that gives you great trends, based on how you're using it. And that's a really important piece, is based on how you're using it. It might also be one of those things that you need to constantly look at your data too, and your retention policy, because maybe there was a change in your business that made it so something that you're gathering is completely useless anymore. And this really falls back to what Aaron was talking about with monitoring your processes and making sure that as our business changes, that we don't continue to capture, like, for example, data that's useless in our business, but we just capture it because we've been capturing that same data for 10 years or 20 years. But if it's useless, we need to start moving on and think about what's more important. So I guess going down that road, that's where I would start with this. How long should we consider retaining our data? It should be long enough to where it's still useful. When it's not useful anymore and you're not required to retain it anymore, get it out of your way, because just like Tony was saying at the very beginning, too much data can be bad. Especially if you are paying money to store that data, whether it's in a warehouse or like on a server that you're paying for, becomes costly.
So how often do you recommend that companies review their policy?
Oh gosh, I would almost match it up to what Aaron's recommendation was, once a year, maybe every other year, but really should be something that's more frequent than not. It should not be a policy that you draft and put it on the shelf and go, oh, we got it. But then you don't compare that policy to what you're actually retaining and to what you're actually purging based on what you already wrote and identified as being useless for you after a certain number of years.
Yeah, we have an acronym in accounting called SALLY, same as last year. So it's hard for people to step back and just really look at the process instead of just looking at what they've always done,
Yeah.
and really taking a bird's eye view of, why are we doing this? And making some good decisions there.
Yeah, you bet. I did want to touch on just a couple of the pros and cons too of that long-term data retention, because a lot of times, we talked about spectrums. There's some people who like to retain data for a long time, and some who purge it as soon as possible. So wherever you are on that spectrum, we kind of got to think about the pros and cons of it, because when we talk about the pros of data, I think we think about the ability to reach back and kind of analyze what happened in the past, and hopefully it gives us context of what's going on today or something that might happen in the future. When you archive data, though, historical data, really it's useless unless it's in a format that can be retrieved in a way that you can use it. So if you have a bunch of data, for example, that's on a bunch of handwritten sheets that's stored in a banker's box in your basement, and you think, oh gosh, I would love to analyze that data. Boy, it's going to take you a lot of time to pull that out and put it in a format where you can use it. And most times people just will not do that. So when you think about archiving data, it does us no good to archive data when you can't use it sometime in the future or use it efficiently. The other thing that might be important too is thinking about the time cycle of your data, just like we were talking about this retention period, because past historical data can be extremely useful to us, and it might be based on things like historical events. Like if there's a certain event, like the state championship came to your town, and it only happens once every 5 years. Well, if you're a retail business or a restaurant business, you could go back to that day and see your customer counts, your head count, whatever it was that drives your business, and be able to say, well, gosh, that was our experience when it happened then. We need to be prepared when it happens this year. And so that historical data can be extremely important and useful. And shoot, it might even be something as simple as annually, how many meals or how many tables you turn when there's homecoming, in your town. So these types of things are really cool. But the cons, though, it can get into almost what we were alluding to. It's basically storing it in a way that you can't use it, or storing data that is just completely useless altogether, whether or not it's in a useful format. And also, I don't want to, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on this, the format of your data. I think about this because when I was growing up, I thought CDs were like the best. Like, I was converting all my tapes to CDs, and I thought that would be one of those things that, they were sending CDs on satellites that are going out into space, and I was like, oh, well, this must be a permanent way to store data. Well, come to find out, it is very much not. So the media that you store your data in, whether it's paper, floppy disks, CDs, we need to really think about that, because that data could become worthless or corrupt in a very short time period. So we want to make sure that this data is kept in a way that it's going to be safe as well.
I think that's funny that you mentioned that, Drew, because just yesterday I had to get a very old laptop out of the closet so that I could get some pictures off of a CD, because my computer doesn't have a CD drive anymore. So it's very true. Yeah. And that was only 8 years ago that I stored them. So yeah. And I think Erin had a follow-up question here.
So I have two. One is touching on that. We recently had a discussion internally about an article, and was it Boeing that was still using a floppy drive to do some calculations? It was pretty interesting, but some people are using some really old tech. But kind of hopping on to Drew's point about having it in a usable format, I think a question that I get a lot is when someone has a lot of paper data, is it worth it to convert that all to electronic and store it in a Google Drive or a Dropbox or Box? Is it worth it for them to, move all of their old documentation online?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of times it'll come down to the cost benefit. So the cost of you actually going through and converting that data, whether you have to pay somebody to do it or whether you have to task one of your employees to spend, a significant amount of time converting that data and not doing their actual employee duties. But if that data is critical to your business, it's probably worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it should start with that cost benefit analysis. But I think when possible and when it's easy, especially, converting to the modern format is critical.
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah. And matter of fact, once it's converted to a modern format, the way data has been going is they've been making things, the technology has made things more and more easily to convert to different formats. So just like we've been talking about some of those hard media like paper or floppy disks or CDs, now with everything in the cloud, that's just the next level and the next step for data retention. And as we all know, once it's in the cloud, you can convert it to just about any format you need. So keeping up with the times is extremely important.
Tony, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, nothing else to add. Good discussion.
And you got both your questions in, Erin?
I did. Well, one was a comment, one was a question.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure before we move on.
Yeah. So I think we're buttoned up just against the 45 minutes, which we had kind of planned as our presentation part. I'd love to get final thoughts. Brenda, you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's my main thing is it's always good to ask why. And regularly ask yourself why. Why are we tracking this data? Why are we keeping this data? What is it showing us? Are we using it in the proper way? And are we getting the most out of it? So that's my best advice to our clients is that you really need to take the time to step back and take a look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and don't be afraid to change.
Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I would a lot of what we talked about seems like it can get really complex, but it doesn't have to be. I would just challenge everybody, no matter where you are in the use of your company's data, if you're maybe just beginning to use some of this non-traditional data or even some of the more traditional sources to really look at and analyze, I would just challenge you to start small. Think of one or two things that would really move the needle in your business or things that you feel really does impact your business. And start measuring those things. Start with some of the principles that we've talked about today to capture, analyze, store that data. So when you start small, then you can expand a little bit more once you have processes and other things developed. But really task everyone to start.
I love that. I think that's great to ask people to look at, one or two things that they can have an impact on their business by doing. My final thought is, and we'll go to Tony afterwards, but I have to second Brenda, that review of your current process and the continual review of your processes and how you manage data will set you up for so much success down the road. If you just have that in place to review, helps you make sure that your data that you're gathering is valuable and right and correct, and helps you identify if there's any breakdowns. So I think that has to be my final thought. If you once you've identified it, make sure you have a good process and are reviewing it. Tony?
Yeah, I think, those are all great final thoughts as well. The one thing that I want to encourage all businesses to do is to keep an eye on technology in their industry. To be left behind is certainly not the right answer for any business. I know technology is scary and change is hard. And I'm certainly not advocating that businesses need to be on the cutting edge. But we certainly don't want any of our clients to be in that kind of lagging group. So So certainly keep an eye on technology and keep up to date with what's happening in your industry. Be a steward of, study, read articles, those kind of things. And then the other thing that plays off of what Brenda and Aaron have already said of, kind of continuing to question, the data that you're analyzing, I would also encourage you to step back and, question what you think you know, okay? So, because there's always an alternative answer and you're going to be biased towards what you're doing currently, but, challenge yourself to step back and look at things from a different angle and a different light on the data that you look at and the processes that you use. And if need be, seek consultation outside your company, whether that be within your industry, your trade groups, or a trusted advisor like a CPA, to really question what you're doing and maximize your business performance. So those would be my closing comments.
Great. Well, thank you both. It looks like we do have a couple questions. I'm just going to read the top one, and then maybe each person can take a shot at answering it. Top one is, what role can JCCS play in our data processes, tech stack, and utilizing them effectively? Where are the boundaries between what JCCS does and our third-party IT services do? Who wants to take that one on?
I can offer some opening comments. So really the role that JCCS plays with our clients is that consultation and design of what your tech stack is going to be. And I don't want to give away episode number 2, but maybe this is a primer for that one. But really it's to go in and look at a business's processes and procedures, their staff, the people that they have employed with them, their resources, maybe outside of their organization, and help them define what a good technology solution would be, and also devise some processes and procedures around that to properly utilize, data processing and technology and optimize their business. So that's one of the things that we like to feel our role is.
And I'll jump in here too, and just I know we've got several people around the firm who are great at stepping into businesses and asking the questions. They're not shy about questioning why the bookkeeper is doing this or why the owner is doing that. And when we can find somebody who is ready to have that open discussion and ready to make some changes, it's really fun for us. Because we can go in with fresh eyes, and we do it internally as well. I think some of the greatest discussions I've had are back and forth with Erin, because she's not afraid to question me. And she's like, are you sure that's the best way? So I think it goes back to trust as well. When you find somebody that you trust as an advisor, you can really start looking at things and making some changes.
Drew, you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think you nailed it. Yeah, and I don't think it's, just to play on the second part of the question regarding, boundaries between JCCS and your other service providers like IT, it's all got to work together. So it starts with the process, and then we figure out how to all work together. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would have to second what Brenda said about the not being afraid to ask the tough questions or question certain processes. This, like I was talking about before, developing workflows and processes is one of my favorite things to do, because it's always different, it's always new, and you get to have some lively discussion if you ask the tough questions. And sometimes the answers don't change, or you make changes slowly, but we can definitely help kind of establish the data that you need, the data that's valuable, what softwares might be best or what processes might be best, and definitely working in conjunction with an IT service. I don't think we replace that in any way. But it's a very open conversation about the needs that you're experiencing and how the solutions all work together. And then I think our next question is, does JCCS offer any services to guide business owners on how to better use things like Microsoft 365 and Salesforce? There are likely capabilities in those tools that we're underutilizing, but we can't find someone to help us set them up properly and use them well. I kind of want to take a stab at this one from a little bit of a step back and saying, I think we're able to talk specifically about Microsoft 365 because it's something that we're using internally. So we've seen things that have worked, some things that haven't worked. But when it comes to evaluating whether software is working or not, we can at least start asking the right questions. We ask, what do you want it to do for you? And then go from there. So I think we have some capabilities in talking about softwares that maybe we don't use, but at least where to start the question asking. We work with a lot of vendors and we talk to a lot of the developers of different softwares. And just that experience and knowing how to talk to a software developer makes a huge difference when you're asking questions on how to best utilize a system. Anyone else have a thought on that?
Yeah, just, we get this question a lot where somebody's using a piece of technology or a software that is kind of unique to their business or company. So a lot of times through just our natural course of business, we can set up or suggest formal training for that company or that employee or business owner that's specific to that software, because we are not the creators of these softwares. So these software creators have really good training training modules, or it's created by a third-party provider that we can help you connect with those services to really be a power user of that data. But where we really can come in, if your data that you're getting or the information that you can use in Salesforce or like Microsoft 365, if you feel like you're not able to utilize that as well, that's where we can step in and look at your processes and look at ways that we can capture that data or analyze it in a way that's meaningful for you and your business. Not necessarily how to do the day-to-day setup and stuff, but really how to make it, give it the big bang for your buck.
Great. Brenda, Tony, either of you have thoughts?
No, I think I would reiterate what Drew said as far as I feel our strengths are being able to come in and look at it from a different perspective and try to help you get the information that you need out of the system.
Yeah, and I think the only comment I was going to make was going to be playing off of your comments, Aaron, and it really plays to the network that we developed. So we collaborate with a lot of other CPA firms nationwide, and we also collaborate with a lot of software vendors. So we do have those points of contact in an area that we may not be experts in. So we can certainly try and point people in the right direction. So.
Great. And we had one more question slip in, and I think this one's going to be a great one for Tony and Drew. Is the consulting guidance that you offer a separate service with separate pricing that I'd sign up for in addition to accounting/tax prep? Or is it something that I just ask my JCCS CPA about and it would be added to my regular billing? Either of you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in too. I feel like the consulting side is one of those things where we don't like to do consulting or just tax on the side or, some of these other services. Our approach is more holistic. So a company that is interested in taking their tax and accounting services to the next level, that's where we can look at things as a more of a holistic package, which is true to some of the other episodes that we're going to be showing you in the future, where it'll talk about some of the things that we can do. But usually we try to tie it in with a holistic service, because once we are tying in all the services that we're doing for you, it means we're looking a lot more closely at your business. We're able to work with you in a format where we have great dialogue and a process set up between JCCS and you as the client to make sure that we're moving you towards those goals that we identify in the consulting. And it's a lot more successful when it's a holistic approach like that, with all the services bundled together.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that conversation does start with who you're comfortable with. So if you're already a JCCS client, because that trusted advisor piece, I mean, there's a lot of foundation in a consulting arrangement that starts with trust. So I would start your conversation there. And one of the great things about JCCS is we have a huge team with a ton of expertise in various areas. And then your advisor can bring those people to the table based on whatever the needs are. So.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I think that does it for questions. Greta did have one note that aviation uses older disks. It's less corruption than trying to upload via wireless. But just an extra thought there. Coming up, like we said, this is episode 1 of a 6-part series. We are trying to build on each of the episodes. So we start at the very beginning, data. What does it mean? What does it do? Next, as we've mentioned, we'll talk about ecosystems and plants. We named it ecosystem. It's not just for plants anymore because a business has an ecosystem to help it succeed. After that, we're going to talk about the Intuit products, QuickBooks, desktop and online, how you choose the best solution for you, because each solution answers a very somewhat specific need. So we'll talk about the differences there. And we'll also have a guest on that one. One of our other CPAs, actually, I think we have 2. We have 2 guests on that one, 2 of our CPAs, one from our Helena office and one from Kalispell. Episode 4 is going to be about payroll. Payroll can be seen as this necessary evil. You have employees, you have to do tax compliance. It's not the most fun. There's always changing rules, as we've seen this year with all of the COVID response stuff. So definitely it's how we're going to take payroll, amp it up, and actually use it as an employee benefit. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm pretty excited about that one. Episode 5, we'll have another guest. We're going to be talking about applications, industry-specific apps, just general applications, how they integrate, how you evaluate an application. So it's kind of a little expanded upon the ecosystem that we'll talk about in episode 2. And finally, episode 6, Tony and Drew are going to join us back for the wrap-up, where we wrap it all in a nice little package so you can see how everything's stacked together, and how it can turn your business into a real successful processing machine and get what you want out of it. Anyone else have any final thoughts on our coming soon episodes?
No.
Hope you
I'm
all
excited for it.
Yeah.
Super excited. We will be recording all of the other episodes as well. If you aren't able to make it, we may make some date adjustments as we go through the next couple months, just in case there are things that pop up. It is a pretty unprecedented time, so know that if we do make some adjustments, you'll get a notification via our newsletter or through your whoever you received this invitation from. Also, you can connect with us on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you have any final questions, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help, or talk to your JCCS CPA or app staff. We'll get you in touch with whoever you need to talk to. And thank you all so much for attending our very first episode. We're super excited and glad we were able to have so many attendees. So thanks, you guys. And thanks, Tony and Drew, for being our very first guests.
Yes, thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yep. Happy to be here.
Have a great morning, everyone, and a great Thursday, Friday, and weekend.
Bye-bye.